Good morning, and welcome to the panel on the importance of nonprofit, community, and religious organizations in the process of integrating immigrants. Nonprofits are a vital sector that improves everyone's lives. During this panel, important community leaders who have been part of different nonprofits for decades will present their perspectives, highlighting the importance that these organizations represent. A new study from the Center for Nonprofit in New Jersey shows us some relevant data. There are over 38,000 nonprofit organizations in New Jersey. They employ more than 330,000 people, representing nearly 10% of the state's private sector workforce and generating more employment than many major industries, including construction, utilities, transportation, finance, and insurance. More than 1.6 million people volunteer at nonprofits annually, providing more than 225 million hours of service. Nonprofits improve our daily lives by helping the most vulnerable, training our workforce, engaging in civic discourse, educating and guiding children and adults alike, treating and curing diseases and ailments, protecting our environment, fostering thoughtful dialogue and creativity, supporting cultural enrichment, encouraging generosity, conducting research, providing spiritual support, motivating social change, and ensuring vital services. Below, we welcome you and the expert panelists who will share with us their knowledge and opinions on this vital topic. This panel will be moderated by Daniel Santo Pietro, founder and member of the board of directors of IACO, historian. Daniel was for 12 years executive director of the Hispanic Directors Association of New Jersey.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, I want to welcome you to the 2021 Immigrant Integration Conference. It is a great pleasure to see so many people connected. It is a great pleasure indeed to have this great panel of people that have served our state and our community and that have given so much for the service of others and that have so much to share with us today. Today, we're going to be talking about how important are the nonprofit organizations and the faith-based organizations for the integration of immigrants. As we all know, the United States is a very diverse country, and obviously New Jersey is one of those states that is a melting pot. And IACO, the Immigration and American Citizen Organization, that has been in existence for more than 2 decades, has been in service providing direct services of immigration nature to the immigrants, but we are also committed to helping the community integrate into the American society. And today, more than ever, we need to be working together to give a helping hand to one another and to be able to collaborate through our experiences, through our support and our knowledge to make sure that we can accelerate that integration. I give a special thanks to all the panelists. Thank you so much for agreeing to participate today. Thank you so much for your time and commitment. We acknowledge and we realize that all of you are very busy and that you took time out of your hectic schedules to join us. So thank you once again. To the audience, I hope and I'm very confident that you're going to find all of this information very helpful. At the end of the segment, we're going to give you a survey that I hope that you are able to take a few minutes to complete. I just want to tell you that I am Ileana Montes. I am the director of the legal service of the legal department at IACO. And once again, thank you all for participating. Today, we have Daniel Santopietro. Daniel, thank you so much. Daniel is going to serve not only as a panelist, but also as a moderator for the session. He is a historian and specializes in political science. For 12 consecutive years, Daniel was the executive director of the Hispanic Directors Association of New Jersey, a network of 32 Hispanic organized community-based organizations in our Garden State. Daniel received his bachelor's degree from Harvard College, History of America, and he completed his graduate studies at the Federal University of Pernambuco in Brazil. How exciting, Daniel. He also studied at the Stanford University in Latin America. Next, we have Linda Sipo. Thank you, Linda, for joining us today. Linda is the president and CEO of the Center for Nonprofit. Linda's nonprofit sector experience expands for over 30 years and includes expertise in public policy, compliance, and management issues. Linda is a current Public Policy Committee member and the former treasurer of the National Council for Nonprofits. She serves on the New Jersey Commission of National and Community Service and on the Leadership and Policy Committee of the Council of New Jersey Grant Makers. She holds a degree in political science from Rutgers University. Next, we have Raymond Ocasio. Thank you, Raymond, also for joining us. He is the executive director of La Casa Don Pedro since 1998, and under his leadership, La Casa Don Pedro has achieved significant success and has made a positive impact on the lives of thousands of immigrants. La Casa Don Pedro is considered among the most important leading comprehensive and multi-purpose community-based social services and development organizations in New Jersey. Mr. Ocasio is involved in local, citywide, and state initiatives and works with multiple committees, task forces, coalitions, and associations. I see that Christian also joined us. Thank you, Christian. And I know that you were in a meeting until just very, very recently. Welcome you to the panel. Christian Esteves is the president of Latino Action Network and executive vice president of CWA Local 1037. Christian has a long and a strong record of community leadership at the state and local levels. His career in the labor movement includes serving as education and training coordinator for the New Jersey AFL-CIO from 2002 to 2009, and as a union representative for Communications Workers of America, Local 1037. Christian earned his bachelor's degree from Rutgers University, where he studied labor relations and Latino studies. We next have Reverend Bolivar Flores. He is the Vice President of New Jersey Coalition of Latino Pastors and Ministers. Good morning, Reverend. Thank you for joining us. He is the founder of Ministerio El Sol Sale para Todos. Reverend Bolivar has worked very, very hard, and he is now the Vice President of New Jersey Coalition of Pastors and Ministers, as I mentioned before. He is the Chief of Chaplains in the city of West New York and fourth in command for the National Association of Ministers. Additionally, he works for First Faith-Based Community as the Pastoral Outreach Director of New Jersey Reentry Corporation, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping individuals returning from incarceration. He graduated from New York Theology Seminary with a doctorate degree in theology and clinical pastoral education. Good morning, everyone. And now I turn it over to the moderator, Danielle. Thank you.
Thank you, Ilya. Buenos dias to everyone. I think you will find this panel very interesting, as you can tell by the introductions, in terms of the information that we can share with people about the role of nonprofits and faith organizations as key partners for integration. I think that's the idea that we're trying to most focus on. I wanted to just briefly add one quick thing. I am basically have 42 years of experience working with nonprofits, although the first 20 some odd years was working internationally. Lived in Brazil for 8 years, but I traveled quite a bit through Latin America and some in Africa and Asia, which is what I like to say gives me a firsthand knowledge of immigrants and where they come from and why they come here. And it's something that I have always felt is extremely important to this country. And for that reason, I've become a lifetime advocate of immigration as something that we must deal with and hopefully successfully incorporate into our society. Now, New Jersey is somewhat unique. I think it is one of the states that has some of the strongest influence of immigrants. We have a large Puerto Rican population, which are American citizens, but culturally obviously relate very much to the immigrants that have come to this country. So we're very fortunate today to have 4 leaders from the nonprofit community to speak to us about what essentially we can do to strengthen and help this immigrant community that we all know we struggled quite a bit during the pandemic. We saw a lot of death in our community, which we're still living with. And now we're seeing some light at the end of the tunnel. We're seeing the possibility that we can start restoring our communities to their previous vitality. And it's not going to be easy, but I think the people that are on this panel will help quite a bit. We have the Coalition of Latino Pastors represented here, which is an important organization from faith-based organizations. We have the what do I want to say here? The network of nonprofits that Center for Nonprofits be represented. And we'll have the director of the Latino Action Network. And in the interest of, I will say that I'm also on the steering committee for that network. And then finally, we have also La Casa Don Pedro represented here as one of the most important community organizations in this state. So we have very good people to help us to think through this time. What is it we can do to bring our communities back? Essentially, what we can do, how can we mobilize resources, are all questions that essentially we have to deal with. So I want to particularly start our discussion with the Center for Nonprofits, Linda Sipo. She's a friend of mine from many years ago, and I'm delighted to see her still working so hard for the nonprofit community and trying to find ways to improve our work. So Linda, we'd like to ask you to make a presentation and just give us your insights as best you can of how we can get our communities all back.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Thank you to Jaco for inviting me to be part of this really important conference and this important conversation. I'm looking forward to learning from all of you, from all of the panelists, and I thank everyone for all of the extraordinary work that is happening day in, day out for you know, long before the pandemic and just for years to keep our communities strong. I'm going to just touch on some very broad-based kind of issues that we've been seeing at the Center for Nonprofits for New Jersey's nonprofit community. In case you're not familiar with the Center for Nonprofits, we are New Jersey's statewide network for the charitable nonprofit community. We're a nonprofit ourselves. We've been around for almost 40 years, and we exist to, in a nutshell, to strengthen nonprofits individually and collectively so that they can perform the vital missions in their communities, to our state, make our society better and stronger. So we do that through advocacy and public policy work, research, direct services to nonprofits, and a whole slew of other services as well. So my lens is nonprofits, and so I'll start pretty general, and certainly I'm looking forward to hearing from the rest of the panel. Again, if it weren't, we usually start with a basic overview of how important nonprofits are to the landscape. When we think of nonprofits, we think of the vital services that nonprofits provide. Nonprofits provide a host of programs and services that save and improve lives, anything from direct social services, community development, environmental protection, artistic and spiritual enrichment, and so many other really important programs. But nonprofits are also really important to the economy. In New Jersey, nonprofits employ almost 10% of the private workforce. They spend collectively over $50 billion every year, and they marshal the energies and talents of over 1.5 million volunteers. And so when we're talking about a good, strong, thriving New Jersey, good, strong, thriving communities and society, we really are also talking about how integral a good, strong, thriving nonprofit community is to that. Of course, I don't need to tell this audience, but when it comes to welcoming and serving immigrants and new residents and new Americans, nonprofits have always played an essential role. Nonprofits are trusted anchors in the community, providing needed services on a confidential, compassionate basis. Nonprofits can be a critical bridge to, and sometimes a buffer from, government, because they can be, again, trusted and key partners in community solutions. And we only need to look at the 2020 census and the pandemic as just two examples of how indispensable nonprofits have been in providing services and providing solutions to these critical issues, particularly to our communities of immigrants. As nonprofits, again, we are key to a strong, thriving, fair New Jersey, but we also, if we are committed to promoting a just and thriving society, we ourselves as nonprofits need to lead with and model and reflect our values. Of course, the past 15 months have been absolutely horrendous, but it hasn't started with that. Nonprofits are operating in an incredibly volatile climate between the human and social impact of the COVID-19 pandemic to the polarized public policy and political landscape, the broadening wealth gap in New Jersey and throughout the country, technological challenges and opportunities, and of course, the renewed and heightened outcry for racial and social justice. And as with countless other crises, the COVID-19 pandemic has underscored just how essential nonprofits are. Frontline health and human service providers, comfort, healing, and inspiration of the arts, and everything in between. And when we're talking about a recovery, New Jerseyans will need nonprofits to get them through to recovery and beyond. This has always been the case with countless other crises that we've had to deal with. And clearly, the COVID-19 crisis has had a severe and devastating impact on the nonprofit community. The surveys that the Center for Nonprofits conducts have confirmed that clearly. Most organizations reported at least significant or moderate disruptions due to the emergency, but the pandemic has affected different organizations in very different ways. For frontline organizations, such as those providing health and human services, demand for services continued to skyrocket, but their expenses have gone up faster. Meanwhile, many of the arts and cultural organizations, which had to suspend performances and other key activities, saw demand decrease, but their revenues drop even more. Even with many organizations having had to suspend or curtail services during the pandemic, even if that was just temporary, demand for services still outpaced funding. This is not a new situation, but it has just exacerbated problems that preceded this pandemic. Also, it must be said that while the crisis has had a dramatic impact on nonprofits across the board, there were some notable distinctions in the effects on organizations that reported that they primarily serve communities of color compared with those that don't. Organizations that serve communities of color were a much greater proportion of frontline nonprofits, such as health and human services, those providing essential services in communities. They were more likely to report that they provide services officially deemed essential due to the governor's executive orders. And they were less likely to have suspended services even temporarily during the pandemic. And relatedly, a greater percentage of organizations serving communities of color reported that demand for their services rose in 2020 versus the nonprofit community overall, and they were more likely to report that expenses had gone up. But again, funding has lagged behind across the board for the nonprofit community. And of course, what this means, we've got long-standing problems here with disparities and years of underinvestment in critical systems, deep-seated inequities, and of course, for organizations serving immigrants, many of whom have been left out of the government relief programs, the increased need for services and that weight has been that much greater. Moving ahead, what is critical? What have nonprofits told us that they need? No surprise here, funding, government funds, private funds, those government relief programs for those organizations that could get them have been an absolute lifeline, and we need those programs to continue. Our experience has shown that when crises hit, the nonprofit community gets hit first, and recovery reaches the nonprofit community last. So we need to sustain those kinds of programs. We need to have frank conversations with our partners in philanthropy and in government about the unrealistic expectations that we've been placing on nonprofits for too long. We need to invest in infrastructure, nonprofit infrastructure, so that they are equipped to provide the programs and services that our communities need. And we know that in the nonprofit community more broadly, there's a lot more work to do. People of color are underrepresented still in board and staff leadership positions when compared with the overall makeup of staff in nonprofits and the populations that nonprofits serve. Organizations that primarily serve communities of color are significantly more racially and ethnically diverse than those that don't. And there are gaps in leadership positions in terms of pay and other important indicators. So if we are going to work collectively to improve all of these factors, it does require working together. Internally in our organizations, we need to ensure that board and staff recruitment, representation, power, policies, programs, in all of these aspects, we are being truly accountable to the communities that we serve and establishing pipelines for leadership and growth and representation. Externally, we can and must, as nonprofits, continue to be forces for change through public policy, advocacy, voter engagement, advancing policies that advance the needs of immigrants and marginalized people, and by working together to advance these shared agendas. As nonprofits, we exist to make society better. So we need to recommit ourselves to ensuring that we're living up to that promise through our programs and operations and through advocacy and systems change. It is my pleasure and privilege to be part of this panel, and I look forward to talking further about what we can do together. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. That's very useful. Get us started. If I might ask just one quick question, though, have you seen any signs of how the American Rescue Plan is going to develop in New Jersey and how it might help nonprofits? Is there anything in particular that you know of?
That's still unfolding, and some other folks on the panel may have some information. We do know, of course, that there is $6 billion coming into New Jersey. There are a lot of competing interests that would like to see that money. It has been helpful even to this point to see some of the relief programs that have gone through the Economic Development Authority and other places for nonprofits, but there have also been a lot of nonprofits that have been left out of that. So in terms of our advocacy and working in partnership with others, we want to see some of those pipelines opened. And a lot of these, of course, will go through specific departments in terms of providing programs and services. One of the things we'd also like to see is the contracting process, the process by which nonprofits can access some of these funds. We're hoping that some of that can be simplified so that the money can get to a wider range of organizations, get there faster, and with less in the way of unnecessary bureaucracy and hoops to have to jump through to compete for those funds and to implement them.
Okay, well, thank you. I think it's very important that people understand this bigger picture of nonprofits that's going on in New Jersey, but it is certainly an area that Hispanics and immigrants in general need special attention. So we appreciate your adding that note to what you're saying. I think what we could do now is maybe go to an important part of our nonprofit community, if you want to call it that, our faith-based groups. We have a Reverend Bolivar Flores, and he, I think, can explain quite a bit about what faith-based organizations are doing in the current situation and some of the ideas they have that would help our communities particularly. Reverend?
Daniel, thank you so much. And thank you to the entire group of IACO for this opportunity. It's an honor to be in the panel with Mr. Ocasio and Mr. Esteves and Linda, and of course, you, Mr. Santo. But more important, I want to say thank you to the member of our community to listen to this panel, to learning, to bring resource to the more vulnerable members of our community. I run a different organization, and I want to start with the New Jersey Reentry Corporation. It's the organization that I run it with former Governor Jim McGreevey. And we serve more than 11,000 reentry participants every year, provide housing, legal service, treatment program, and job placement. And we see that the Department of Correctional released 2,000 inmates. And this community don't have a place to stay. We see that in the middle of the pandemic, the shelter reject the inmates. And I'm so grateful to Governor Murphy, of course, to Lieutenant Governor Sheila Oliver, President Sweeney, and Speaker Coughlin, because they passed a legislation that permit that our churches serving the community like a shelter. These members of our community in the middle of the pandemic have a place to stay. I'm really also grateful to Reverend R. Charlton and to the National Action Network and the New Jersey Latino Coalition Pastors and Ministers that we come together and we serve more than 5,000 hot meals every single day through the state of New Jersey. So I talk about more than 100,000 hot meals every month. But also we putting together a hotline to provide addiction treatment in 24 hours. When we talk about the pandemic of the COVID-19, this is one of the pandemics that our community suffered, but also is the addiction pandemic. More than 22% of the Latino community died overdose. And thanks to the New Jersey Reentry Corporation, to the ministry that we founded, we have a hotline and we provide detox in 24 hours. We have a telemedicine for the members of our community. It's a lot of people who don't have insurance, who think because don't have a document, don't qualify or be rejected from the hospital. And thanks to my dear friend, the president of the Health Qualified Center of the state of New Jersey, we opened the door for the undocumented community. It's a lot of stuff that our community suffer, but also it's a good news. And today, people who don't have a green card qualify to have a driver license in the state of New Jersey. The pandemic teach us a lot. It bring people from different ethnies. I'm so grateful to my dear friend, Wendy Nu. Wendy Nu donated to me a 25,000 feet building for provide trainings for our community. It's no matter if the people don't have document or don't have document. It's a training available, create credentials for them in solar panel, GD classes, English classes, job placement. And when something that I see in the Hispanic community that I think so we have to work is educate our community about service. It's a great service that La Casa Don Pedro offer. It's a lot of people maybe because the language, because where they live, or maybe the access of technology, they don't receive. It's a lot of service that my ministry offer. We help more than 6,300 every year. We sign an agreement with 17 countries called the Coalition of Latin American Countries, CLAM. And we provide birth certificate, and we provide passport, and we provide diplomas for free for the community. So, like I said in my radio show every Monday through 97.5, I say that it's educate our community. It's resource there. Thanks to Senator Teresa Ruiz, Senator Nelly Poe, Assemblywoman Pintor Marin, we passed a legislation that the undocumented community be received $2,000. So I see that the state of New Jersey respond very good in this pandemic. And I see that the pandemic unify us. So it depends how you see that. It's a great writing from the Catholic Church who say that it depends how you see the situation. For me, I see like a bless. I know a lot of people die. I see a lot of people with no place to stay. But also I see people like Tonio Burgos, who fight every single day for the White House, provide service, eliminate barriers for the Latino community. I see people like former Governor Jim McGreevey, who every day start his journaling with me at 3 a.m. Industry provides service. So for my conclusion is, please visit our website, www.njreentry.org. Call us, 201-355-6308. 201-355-6308. See, you need a public notary. See, you need a lawyer. See, you need somebody who can walk to get your driver license with you. Call us. We here. It's a lot of service that the state to have it. Regarding to the federal money, we have a two champion. And we have Senator Booker, and of course, my dear friend, Senator Menendez. And they fight to bring to the state of New Jersey this money. No one let a nonprofit qualify for many reasons. So you read, have to be something long-term. Can be a service that you provide for 3 months or for 1 year, and that's it. Something that I work right now is with President Sweeney and Speaker Coughlin, is a pass a legislation for people who spend more than 40 years in prison and have 73 years old. These people, I don't understand why these people have to die in prison. I think so these people need a place to stay. Buy a building. So it's a lot of service for long-term that the nonprofit can qualify with this money. Of course, create transportation, building bridge. But for the nonprofit sector, buy computers, put in a computer program. That's a long-term program. So I think so. See, we come together with different belief, but with one mission. And the mission is eliminate this barrier for our brothers and sisters who suffer every single day because lack information. Thank you for this opportunity. Daniel, thank you so much. And I'm so proud again, I have to say that, because what Raymond Ocasio do every day, or Christian Esteban every day, I see Christian everywhere, all this meeting, 5 for the Latino community. So I'm so proud, Christian, for everything that you do. And Linda, to teach the nonprofit organization is God work. God bless everyone. And again, thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Reverend. It's a very inspiring speech. I'm glad we were able to hear from you on this. Do you have any any idea of what the major thrusts, major projects we need to implement to really help our community is for the next, actually probably a couple of years, to help to restore them? Is there any things in particular? You mentioned a few things, but what do you think are the most important ones that the organization might be able to take as initiatives?
So it depends the mission and the vision of the organization. For me, and that's the reason I put in the sample to work in this legislation, for me is buy a building, and I apply, by the way, for the money. I apply already. So we're in the process. So it's buy a building and give you opportunity for these old people who spend 40, 65, 45 years in prison, and give you a second chance opportunity that they can die like a human being. Maybe they can see his grandson for one time again. So it's the pain again. I know that I have only 2 minutes, but it's the pain again about the mission. Maybe your organization is about education. Well, you can put in a computer lab for the community. You can ask into the state that funding this, because this is a long-term education program. The computer be there every year. Maybe one or two have a difficult technology issue, but be there. So it's depending about your mission. I think so. It's come together, the board come together and see what they can do. But I respect everybody opinion, mission, and of course, vision in life.
Well, the important thing is too, is what you're showing is how our faith-based community can do so many things. And it's so important to any kind of overall effort that we're trying to accomplish for our community. It's going to be very challenging over the next couple of years, but I think you've outlined some good ideas, and I hope we'll see some of these ideas come to fruition as time goes on. Now we have our two other people. Christian, I believe, is here. If Ray, if we save you for last, would that be a problem? I'm sorry, I think you're muted here.
I was muted. I said, I'll just starve to death. Don't worry.
You will, huh? Take a few things, because I wanted to get Christian being a network,
Okay,
just to show how that corresponds to what the churches are doing. Christian, are you okay with that? But you have about 15 minutes, or more or less, and if you can explain what LAN has done and the impacts of the pandemic, but now seeing that there's new possibilities opening up, what are the kinds of things that we can look for? Did I get Christian? I don't know if he's muted here, but we'll see.
He is muted.
He
And
is muted. How
may
can
have
we
stepped away.
unmute him? Pardon?
He is muted and he may have stepped away.
No, he's there.
Well,
Unless-
he's there, but he may not be in front of his computer.
Oh, you don't think that's him, huh?
I think so. He's free, sir. He come back.
Yeah, okay. Give him a few minutes. All right. Well, then we will go to La Casa Don Pedro, because I think this is probably one of the most concrete examples of what we're trying to do. And in the state of New Jersey, it's just been such a major force that I believe you can tell us a lot about both the impacts of the pandemic, but also what are some of the possibilities for the future? How can we really move ahead? And your organization provides some, I'm sure, very concrete examples. So anything you can share with us, we would appreciate.
Thank you, Daniel. And I also appreciate the opportunity to join the others here, and thank Jaco for inviting me, and particularly giving me the opportunity to reconnect with Dan and Daniel, who I haven't seen for a while. So it's good to see him. Let me start by saying that La Casa Don Pedro was created some 50 years ago, and it's named after Don Pedro Abiso Campos, who basically provided the inspiration to the then, let's say, immigrant population, although they are US citizens. When they come to New York or New Jersey or anywhere in the United States, they are citizens, but they are also immigrants, because they are confronted with all the issues of any immigrant, of getting accustomed to a new environment, a new land, a new culture, language issues, finding employment opportunities. Many might be coming, as they still do today. Some come from farm country into urban environments. Some come from professional skills and find difficulties in practicing their profession because they are newcomers. And as newcomers, they fall into a particular lot of society, in American society. As newcomers, they generally start at the bottom and have to work their way up and have many issues. And so the 10 families that came together in the early days of La Casa some 50 years ago basically took the inspiration of Abiso Campos and basically took on the mission of self-sufficiency, empowerment, and we've added over the years redevelopment of its community, because where people live so much determines their faith. You've heard people say your zip code will determine your outcomes. If you live in a poor neighborhood, a zip code that's poor, you will have a poor education. You probably have poor opportunities for work. You'll have poor opportunities to access health. You'll have poor opportunities for having a nutritional restaurant option, or even buying groceries where you can buy fresh fruit. So La Casa has been around for 50 years and has taken on the mission that we have. And that mission basically believes that the problems that people face, whether they're immigrants or just simply living in poverty, are really codependent, in essence, that you cannot solve one problem. You can't take an unwed mother and say, well, here's some milk for your baby. You have to deal with her education, you have to deal with her housing, you have to deal with so many of the issues, all of the factors that are social determinants of one's existence. And so we believe in a comprehensive approach. And so for the last 50 years, we have built an array of programs that deal everything from parenting, prenatal parenting classes, infant toddler programs today. We have pre-K programs, we have after-school programs, we have family counseling, we have domestic violence counseling, we have rental assistance, we have emergency assistance, we have energy assistance, we have workforce development, we have out-of-school youth education, we have immigration services. We have an array of services. We develop housing, we believe in community planning, community organizing, and do actually do development. So we've done everything you can imagine to deal with improving the lot of individuals and improving the lot of the families and the communities they live in. So when you talk about, in normal times, the point that Linda made earlier about the existence of nonprofit, we live on the margins. For lack of a better way of presenting it, we are seen as charities, and so we think we're thought of as being free. And the fact of the matter is, we run an organization that's like any other business that has to have a bottom line, that has to manage its resources, because one, those resources are scarce, and they come committed. And so you don't have the freedom to do what you would like all the time. Sometimes you're, let me say this, La Casa started out as an advocacy organization. We were a voice for a community that didn't have a voice. Today, because of the network of programs that we have at the beck and call of government, we are a service organization. We continue our advocacy, but we're overwhelmed by the level of services that we have to provide on a daily basis. And so all the things that Linda said about the nonprofit world in terms of living on a limited budget, being mandated, I think, to do certain things in a certain way, and trying to break out of that to do things the way you think need to be done represents a problem. I also want to say that in the history of La Casa, particularly as I came into La Casa some 20 years ago, we were perceived as a Puerto Rican organization, but what we knew and what we saw happening in Newark, where La Casa is based primarily, is that communities changed. And we saw that there was a strong Dominican, Ecuadorian, Peruvian, Colombian, Mexican, name it, West African population, all moving into our community. And so we accepted and embraced all the immigrants, and we have been providing services for the last 20 years to everyone and anyone who is a resident in Newark, particularly those who live in the North Ward, which in large part of the 85,000 people who live in the north end of the city, most of which are in fact immigrants. And I say immigrants, you have all levels of generations, first generation, second generation. You probably have some third and fourth generations, some Puerto Ricans who are still part of that community. I also want to say that we have some 250 employees, of which the vast majority have a direct relationship to the city and the community that we work with. And during this pandemic, many of them have been inflicted with all of the ills that you can imagine. They too have been infected with COVID-19. They have family and relatives who are affected. They have family members who have lost employment. They have been behind in their rent. They have children who are not going to school and learning remotely. These are all the problems that everyone is facing, but they're particularly acute, I think, in our community because we still are at that bottom rung, if you want to think of it as a community, particularly the immigrant community. We are the working in the service industries. We are the ones who are living over crowded conditions. We are the ones who didn't have good health. we're the ones who are still struggling with our education. So all of those problems persisted even before the pandemic, and now during the pandemic, they are accentuated, and maybe more people are becoming aware of the extent of it, but we're really showing the inequities that our society has provided, particularly if you're starting from the bottom rung. That's not to say people cannot make it out of it, but it is a long haul and it's a difficult haul, and it's become more difficult during these times. And what do we all face? Well, first, as an organization, we too had to work remotely, and it required us to transition as an organization to take the service that we were used to, which was based on face-to-face, day-to-day contact with people that build a relationship and build the trust, and convert that into remote learning, remote communications, using social media, using Facebook, all these things to sort of stay connected to our communities. At the same time, staying connected meant that we had to understand what their issues they were facing and how we could meet those challenges. To give you an example, one of the first needs that became evident was food. People needed access to food. And there were any number of food pantries and food distributions that were put out. We had experience earlier during Sandy, which was another emergency situation, where the Red Cross came and opened their trucks and said, come and get it. And crowds of people came and took whatever they could get their hands on. If you put your hand on it, you took it. It didn't matter if it was a broom or a shovel or a bag of sugar. It didn't matter. You were just taking because it was there for the taking. We didn't approve of that approach. And many of the food pantries, you can stand on lines all day and wait your turn to get water or to get food. We didn't want to do that. What we have done is we've screened our families and we have selected them carefully to make sure that, one, they'll get food, and we're getting produce from table to table and other food items and groceries. We're also getting donations from Goya Food. And we've also used our contributions to provide debit cards in the supermarket so that the meat or the milk or the eggs or the bread that we could not get from donations could be purchased by them, and they could still manage to have a meal. But because we selected them, we made them aware that they could come back on a regular schedule and receive that contribution, so that it was not that you would have to go stand online and hope that you would get food. You were assured that you would be provided with those elements. We've also joined with the Newark Working Kitchen, which is also known as the World Central Kitchen, that has worked in other emergencies, and they too have been working in Newark. And we are now feeding, I think, about 300 families with prepared meals twice a day. So that if it's a family of 5, we'd give them 5 meals from different restaurants in town. It's a way of maintaining those restaurants in operation, but at the same time ensuring that their workers were able to do it. I'm talking about the kitchen workers and the dishwashers and things like that, which are the people who we serve in many cases. And we've also, most of those restaurants were downtown, but we've now gotten them to come into our part of town. And so some of our local restaurants are now providing those foods. The other immediate need that we found was people were behind in rent. And we started to look at what was going on. I must admit, both the food programs and the rental assistance programs that are available not only to the immigrant population, but to all the populations, have been somewhat disorganized. And that comes from the nature of how our national government responded to this pandemic. But clearly, even at the local level, we have to have, I think, improvised solutions. Perfect example, the city of Newark provided rental assistance of $1,000 in July of last year. But since July, how many months have passed, and how many months have now families been in arrears? 1 month's rent of $1,000 did not solve their problems. The state of New Jersey has offered 3 rental assistance programs through a lottery, through algorithms that determine who should be the winners. But they offered 3 months, 6 months, and now, you're in the 12th month, 13th month of a pandemic, and some families have been in arrears for that longer period of time, with a moratorium that will come to an end in June of this year. Might be extended. The rescue funds that are just coming down are going to be hitting us. The state has just introduced their 3rd rental assistance program. The county just announced one, and I spoke this today with the city of Newark. They will announce another one themselves. And this will happen throughout the state and throughout most of the country. But again, these programs are highly selective in the sense that it's almost the luck of the draw. There's one of the things, we also received some money, and we've been very careful about the impact that we can provide with our program. Again, we're trying to target and maximize the impact. So we are trying to deal with immigrants, and we're also asking people who are being able to go back to work and who can sustain themselves so that they won't be a recurring case of being in arrears, who we provide assistance. The city, I think, is now thinking about providing back rent and forward rent so that as a way of getting people through this pandemic. There's a need to look to better organize these programs, whether it's food distribution, whether it's rental assistance, or as we can all attest to, how we vaccinate and how we get information about the pandemic and health emergencies. So I think, you know, one of the lessons to be learned is we have to plan for these things and we have to organize them better so we're able to be much more effective. I want to talk about, there is a big misunderstanding about the moratorium throughout the communities, but particularly by the immigrant population. A moratorium allows you not to pay rent. A moratorium will prevent you from not paying utility bills. A moratorium will prevent you from being evicted, but it may not necessarily wipe out your debt. And so families have made the assumption, well, it's a moratorium, I don't have to pay. Well, you will have to pay somehow, some way. Now, for those who can benefit from the rental assistance programs or utility assistance programs, that's a plus. But many families have failed to take note of that. Many of them are relying that it's going to be forgiven or just go away. There was some legislation, the People's Bill, that tried to help establish that. That has not passed in the state of New Jersey, although there has been rental assistance programs. The question still remains that some families are going to be shocked that their landlord will knock on their door and tell them they're going to be evicted because they have not taken the measures. And we, all of us, the state government, county governments at all levels, city governments, and even some nonprofits have not done enough. That's been one of the major things that we've had to deal with, is trying to share information. But again, we're handicapped because we're now not having the day-to-day daily contact with families. We're going through social media, and even that becomes too confusing. So we have to make sure that that information is gotten to us, to all our families, particularly the immigrant population. There is a lessening of the requirements. There were some very strict requirements about showing income, about showing a lease, and showing that you were had lost income or were affected by the pandemic. And in some cases, immigrants were not allowed to take advantage of the rental assistance. That is softening up. I think you're going to see some changes. Clearly, the changes at the national level will bring some changes at the local level. And so I'm optimistic that you'll see that. I want to talk about an experience we had through the Department of Community Affairs. There was an opportunity to help our small businesses. We knocked on over 90 businesses in the Lower Broadway community from, Lower Broadway community, basically Broadway and Bloomfield Avenue, and spoke to them and said, we have resources that we can give you to help you overcome this pandemic. Unfortunately, the reality of our community, particularly the small businessmen, I'm talking about the grocery stores, the restaurants, et cetera, many of them were unable to take advantage of those programs because they lacked the documentation to demonstrate that they had payroll, or they had paid bills, or that they lost revenues. And that's a shame. That speaks to the need for further work with the business community so they can be supported, not only during these times of pandemic, but also during normal times when they're trying to develop their businesses. So it speaks to a lesson to be learned from this pandemic. I want to talk about two other things. Well, one other area that we talked about, or that we noted when we dealt with our populations, the mental stress that families were going to. Mental health became an issue. And we're working with the Johnson & Johnson Foundation and Johnson & Johnson Company to provide instructions and conversations and counseling as well, as an aside, so that our families can get that relief, whether it's domestic violence or whether it's just the issues of working through the pandemic, of being unemployed, being concerned about unable to pay your rent. I want to mention one other program. During the pandemic, we actually opened up what we call the study hall. Parents who had to go to work because they could not afford not to go to work, still did not want to leave their children alone, or did not feel that their children would be able to maintain their academics even when it was being offered by remotely. So we actually offered an alternative, we called it a study hall, by using what was our after school programs as a full day program to take care of the children who would otherwise would be left alone or would not have the education. I want to talk about some promising things that I think are coming out, well, particularly out of Newark, that I think will have ramifications for immigrants, but for the entire population. The mayor just announced yesterday, and I've been a part of the group that's been working on this, a guaranteed income for Newark residents. They're offering a regular income. In this case, it's going to be $6,000 or $500 every month for a group of families, so that they could actually use that money to repair their automobile should they have this repair, to pay for their meals, to pay for medical expenses, to pay their rent on an old basis. What we're trying to show is that poor people are good economists. They just don't have enough money. And if you give them additional money, they will be able to manage their affairs and actually improve the quality of their life. So we're hoping this is a 2-year experiment. If you want to think about that, there will be a control group as well as the families or individuals that will benefit from it. And the community will be a reflection of all of Newark. So basically it'll be families that earned incomes under low income families under 200% of the median income. That's a promise, because that's a promising experiment that's being done throughout the country. But I think there's 34 cities that will be engaged in it. And it hopefully, as a policy example, might lead for us to have a guaranteed income that so many other countries, developed countries, have. The other one is myself and Mikasa have been involved with the city in what we call Equity Development Advisory Committee for the mayor. We are looking at how the plight of low-income families is in Newark in terms of the quality of the housing and their ability to afford housing. We know that housing affordability in New Jersey is a very expensive item. It is particularly true for immigrant families that often are relegated to inferior housing, deteriorated housing, basement, attic apartments, and pay high rent and have high occupancy where you actually have congestion. What we're looking to see is we're looking at ways that we can develop and provide more affordable housing that will be new construction. We're also looking at preserving our affordable housing and making sure that the quality of that house is improvable. One of the suggestions we've made for the rescue funds is the $47 million that will come to Newark in this particular category for housing, is that it be dedicated for the preservation and the development of affordable housing. Again, if we can do that, if we can make a concerted effort to provide and ensure affordable housing for all people, particularly the low-income families, I think we'll be improving a lot of our immigrant families. I want to also mention that the work that we do is a constant everyday affair, and we're struggling every day to do that, despite some obstacles and some stones that people might throw my way, like today. I won't talk to you, Chris, today about that, but I do want to say advocacy is as important for us as anything else. We continue to be in advocacy. Advocacy is done at the street level, is done with the day conversations with people, but it's also done through networks. You know, we're part of the Newark Community Development Network. We're part of Early Childhood Coalition. We're part of the Healthy Newark. We're part of the New Jersey Housing Community Affairs, social justice. We engaged in any number of outlets that are more inclined to be able to take a deep dive and study the policy issues at levels that we, at the grassroots level, whether it's the minister or myself or others who are working in the field, we don't have the time. In fact, Danielle will remember, we looked at the Hispanic Directors Association as being that network that basically could do the research, could write the white papers that could provide insight into the needs of our communities, the needs of nonprofits, so that as a public policy, they could be addressed. Linda's organization is another one organization that does the deep dive into, what is the life of a nonprofit organization and how do you improve so that you can make it. Simple things like think of nonprofits as providing a government service. If your government was providing the services that we provide directly, their costs would be much higher. We're expected to do it on half the dollar and without having to recognize our indirect costs. Those are things that are unfair and it affects the ability and the quality of the service that we can provide. So I think I'll end it at that, but I think the pandemic, while it's a terrible thing, I think offers us an opportunity to see how those who live in our cities and those who live at the lower end of the economic scale have to survive, and how we have to focus our attention to make sure that their quality of their life is improved, but also that we are prepared for the next pandemic. It may not be 100 years. It may be something called climate change. It may be some other disaster that we don't know. But for sure, we can count on that the people who are the immigrants, the people who are living at the lower end of the economic scale, will be the ones that will be most impacted.
Well, thank you, Ray. That's quite a bit. Went over your time a little bit, but it was well worth it.
Sorry, I didn't time myself.
No, that's fine. I do have one quick question, though. I know La Casa always had a history in preschool.
Yes.
And I don't know what happened under COVID exactly. And now that we're really talking about trying to do preschool across the board,
yeah,
at a federal level, what is La Casa's involvement or future in that?
We are very much involved, and I had to. We had some shocking news the other day, and I had to reach out to the deputy assistant or assistant commissioner to get the facts and to also tell them the point of view from the nonprofit world. We have been for about 13 years under a stagnant budget freeze, if you want, and we have teachers who 13 years ago lost parity that we fought so diligently for at the beginning of this program some 21 years ago. The city is trying to make some efforts to improve that. We were just able to have a new pay scale for teachers, which has helped some teachers and has also standardized it. But the other workers that have not been part of that increase have to be paid attention to. And that's one of the points we made when we talked about what the district understood to be a budget cut, which we understand is that the DOE is trying to understand a little bit more closely how the city is using its money for pre-K. What I can say is that for the 13 years, 14 years that we've been under a budget freeze, for all practical purposes, the quality of the program has been hurt. I have teachers who have left me. I've lost 20-some teachers over a 4 or 5 year period who went to other districts as the state was expanding pre-K in other school districts. I was losing them because they could go to another district and earn $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, $25,000 more because of the freezes that we've had to live with. And so there is some injustice, and the children, the Abbott decision that was basically designed to help the children of low-income families in cities like Newark, Camden, Trenton, Patterson, were the most affected by the freeze. And the whole program of pre-K was to help them. So we're expanding pre-K across the entire state, and I believe that pre-K should be available to everyone because it is critical for working families at all income levels. But it should not be at the expense of ignoring what was the original intent of the Abbott decision to help the lower income families that were most vulnerable and most impacted by the poor quality of our education.
Well, it will be interesting to see how the whole idea plays out of expanding preschools. So we'll have to keep an eye on that one. I'm going to try to give Christian here his. I think we have enough time to give him full time, don't we? I don't know if people get track to this. You just go right ahead, Kristen. You heard a question from Ray to you, and I mean, hopefully we'll have a little bit of time at the end where we actually can interact a bit more, among the panelists.
Definitely.
So, but I want to, you know, in the interest of transparency, say I am a member of the steering committee that you head. And it's been one of my most informative, best ways to keep track of what's going on in New Jersey, in so many areas. So I invite you to speak about what, you know, you see the impacts of COVID and some of the remedies we need to work on, things we need to work to get our communities back to what we would hope. So go to it.
All right. Well, thank you, Danielle. And I want to thank Iaco for the invitation. You know, as an immigrant rights organization, I'm so happy that they have a panel like this where we talk about community-based organizations, social service agencies, faith-based organizations, because, you know, it's, you know, a lot of times people think about, you know, the issues that impact immigrants, and sometimes they only think of immigrant issues as federal immigration policy, right? And really what it is that immigrant families, as Ray was talking about, are intergenerational, right? And have people of different statuses. Just yesterday, I was listening to a story on NPR where they interviewed these three sisters, and all three of the sisters were different, you know, different status, right? One was, you know, one had come through undocumented. The other one was an immigrant, but was documented. And the other one was born here in the United States and therefore was a citizen. So this family had three different statuses just amongst the kids themselves. And so what was available to them was different based on which child they were talking to. And then when you start getting into families that have been here for a while, it gets even, you know, it gets even more complicated in a sense. You know, myself, I was born here in this, you know, the United States to parents that were immigrants from the Dominican Republic, but my oldest brother was born in DR. So we had some of that in my house where we experienced this, you know, mixed status of family. And so, you know, when people look at the Latino Action Network and say, well, what do you guys do? And why don't you focus on one thing? Why don't you focus on immigration issues? You know, it's because the needs of our community really do cut across different statuses and also just across different sectors. So, you know, when we advocate around education issues, you know, that impacts both the immigrant child as well as the child who is the child of immigrants or the third generation, right? Or fourth, whatever it may be. So we work on various issues. Our organization is made up of volunteers from a lot of different walks of life, from, of course, the nonprofit agencies, but also from education policy, housing, labor, healthcare. And so we try to address different public policy issues across the board, and working with the experts on the ground. So when COVID hit, and we needed to understand what was happening and what the needs were on the ground, you know, we were very fortunate to have folks like Beatrice Osterheld, who runs a Latino social service agency, somewhat like La Casa, that could inform us of what some of the struggles were in terms of how they were trying to serve this population under the constraints of the funding that was provided, right? And as Ray talked about, you know, these funds tend to be designated for certain things, and over time, right? And I've been doing this, you know, more than half of my life. And I started off at the Puerto Rican Action Board as a volunteer when I was in college. But over time, funding that used to be there for these nonprofit agencies that allowed for kind of wraparound services or that allowed for having people at the door that can do intake, not necessarily tied to a specific program, but rather, you know, when someone walked in the door, someone can sit down with a person in crisis, help unpack their issues, and then refer them to the services they need. You know, what we're understanding is that that kind of funding is less and less available. And what you have available now is the type of funding that says you're being funded to to do intake on LIHEAP or on this program or that program. And so in order to provide more holistic help to people, different agencies have to be very creative in doing that and stretch their staff beyond what they're being funded for. But it's great to have on our board folks that are doing this work on the ground and can tell us that when the state offers to do testing, COVID testing or vaccinations, right? And they say, we want the nonprofit agencies to help get the word out, to get people vaccinated, they're not providing the funding along with that, right? So you have strains on the budgets of these organizations and on the staff, and that have to do this on their own time a lot of times. And there's no kind of acknowledgement from the state that this is what's happening. And there's just like this assumption that if you really care about your community, everybody's just going to volunteer this time, right? This is coming from people who don't give up their paychecks, to do their jobs, right? So that has been part of what we've seen. And for us, this has been especially distressing because at the same time as we've seen, the state basically put demands on organizations to do more with less, we've also seen immigrant Latino families being on the front lines of this pandemic because many have not been eligible for federal relief money or unemployment insurance. They have had to continue to go out and work in the most dangerous jobs. And in doing so, we found people, Latinos, in particular, Latino men between, I think it's 18 and 50, being infected with COVID at a rate twice the amount of everyone else. And so the high deaths and the high infection rate in our community have been because of a lack of help for our community. And we've been, in daily legislative hearings talking about the need for this type of help in terms of direct assistance to these families, in terms of that rental assistance that Ray was talking about. And unfortunately, in talking about this, we've had way too many examples to share with these legislative committees of people we lost. And an example that I've had to give over and over again is, my best friend from childhood, someone who worked with myself and Daniel at the Hispanic Directors Association, Mike Ramos, who had helped us with our construction trades training program for women and minorities. And in the first month of the pandemic, Mike had a construction company that he couldn't stop working, not for himself, but because of his workers, because of their immigration status. If they stopped working, their families would stop eating. And he said to me, I got to keep this going for them, for their families. And I pleaded with him to be careful out there, mask up, stay away from people. But because he had to stay out there to help his workers and their families, he ended up getting COVID. And actually, a year ago last week, he passed from COVID. And it broke my heart to see my best friend, who's actually a few years younger than me, who was physically stronger than me, pass so early in this. But, the reason he's gone and the reason so many are gone is because of government's lack of an adequate response to dealing with COVID in our community. Right. And it almost seems like, that the immigrant community and the Latino community and the Black community were expendable. And when we talk to legislators and people in government about providing the resources that were needed, they would talk about how poorly it would pull if they provided direct assistance. And so for us, that's been the major fight over the past year, We finally had a breakthrough this past week with the governor, where he finally announced that they would be providing, some assistance in the form of about $40 million to New Jersey residents who were left behind from COVID aid. But $40 million for the over 400,000 immigrants who were left behind. This would only cover less than 10% of the population that's in need. And then, to make matters worse, this aid had to be shared with other very important programs in other communities, but it really lessened how much goes to the immigrant community. So, we still have a big fight ahead of us. We have to help get more money into that fund. We need to make sure that, all of our immigrant community is eligible for, rental assistance or rental forgiveness. And we're still a ways off from that. But we have these inequities that existed before COVID that were exacerbated by the pandemic, and which will continue beyond the pandemic once everybody's been vaccinated. And we still have to keep fighting for it. So it means that we still have to keep fighting for housing equity. We still have to keep fighting for educational integration and equity. We still have to keep working for workers' rights. We have to make sure that workers have access, have the right to organize themselves so that they can have access to better wages and better benefits and have a voice at work. Because once again, we cannot allow under any circumstances that our Latino workers be treated like, that they're not as important, or that their voice isn't important. And the way that we're going to help immigrants, move into that middle class and realize the American dream is why they came to this country, is to help them get the education and get the jobs and get the upward mobility that they came here seeking. So we're just going to keep be part of that fight, and we're so happy to work with so many of the nonprofits and faith-based organizations that make up the troops and on the ground on this fight.
Very interesting, and I just a couple of quick questions just to throw at you a little bit. What do you think? The land now has a foundation working, and I know that they are trying to explore the possibilities of getting all the CBOs to perhaps begin to work together a bit more. What would you say is the future of that, as far as really, dealing with some of these issues that are we're facing and reviving our communities?
Yeah, we created the Land Foundation as a sister organization to, be a new iteration of what was talked about before, the Hispanic Directors Association, because that was decimated by the previous administration. And so, that type of a table is necessary to bring together all the nonprofits to brainstorm ways to bring that more funding in and to pull their energies. We think that we're on our way to having a very vibrant community of nonprofits that can go together and fight towards this. Matter of fact, in our meeting tomorrow, we're going to have a representative of Senator Menendez's office to talk to us about the earmarking process, so that we can try to get some federal money in to get to help build that infrastructure that was talked about today by Linda and by Ray, right? That we need that kind of capacity building in our organization. So we're working at both the local, state, and federal level to try to bring those funds in, but it only works when all of our nonprofits are at the table together, and that's what we're trying to do through the foundation. And
what would you say will be the major challenge as far as land is concerned, if for the future, for the next year or two, to be able to essentially revive our communities and really put them back, in working? No one's mentioned much about vaccinations, but we seem to be dealing with that. I'm not sure what gaps there are, but after we accomplish vaccinations, there still are so many other issues. You like
So
Ray
Dan,
discussed.
Dan, I think I mentioned that, you know, that the disorganization, lack of planning on the vaccination and for the testing has been displayed. You know, our community is underrepresented in terms of vaccination. It's underrepresented in terms of testing. We've been working with the state, we're working with the city Department of Health and Wellness, and we think we're there, but we're not there yet in terms of having pop-up testing and vaccination. And I was on the call a few minutes ago. My staff is still trying to put the pieces together so that we understand what it is they're asking us. I think one of the points that I made earlier is whether it's rental assistance, whether it's food distribution, or whether it's vaccination or testing, they ask us to do the promotion because they're relying on the confidence and the trust that people have in us. But that's work that's really uncompensated in many cases, and so that presents a difficulties, because then 6 months later they're going to tell me, well, you didn't perform on your contract to provide, you know, LIHEAP applications to low-income families. Well, we're trying. So I think it goes back to the mistake we made as a nation of not planning for these kinds of events, even if they happen 100 years, you know, in intervals of 100 years. You know, we see in climate change, it's happening more and more, whether it's the fires in California or whether it's, you know, tornadoes going through the central lower part of the state of the country. These things are going to happen, and we have to be prepared for them. We have to organize it. And if, in fact, there's value in using the nonprofits who are community-based, then let's make sure that they're in a position that they can actually respond in meaningful ways, as opposed to some ad hoc way.
Well, let me just, thanks, Ray. That's an important point to keep in mind here. Let me just say, I think we're just about out of time. I'm not sure if our time for our panel is totally up, or whether we have some time for any exchange.
We have a few minutes. We have about 3-4 minutes. If anybody would like to have a final comment, that will be fine.
Well, what I'd like to do is invite, well, first of all, Christian, whether you have something to finish your comments, and any questions you would have for Ray or Linda, and Linda, do you have any questions of these people that have been going on at length that you think would be very useful for the whole nonprofit community? So, Christian, do you want to take a minute or two, or?
Well, I'm not going to take a whole minute, but I would say that, I do have a long history of working with Ray. He'll say sometimes working in other directions with him too. But Linda, is very happy to hear what you shared with us, and hope that we can work with you, because we know that so many organizations, especially the new La Casas of the world, the ones that are starting off and they're very they're new, they're just learning, can learn a lot from your Center for Nonprofits, and we hope to find a way to partner with you to see how we can partner to deliver that, what your expertise is, to these new organizations that are popping up in communities that are emerging. Like Newark, the Latino community in Newark has been around for a very long time, right? And you can it shows in the maturity of La Casa as an organization with all its assets and its programs. But you go into places like Freehold or other places where the community is newer, those organizations need a lot of help. So we look forward to reaching out to you and learning more.
Seeing more. How about you, Linda? Any questions that you might like to raise with our other panelists?
At this point, just looking forward to keeping this conversation going. I mean, it was so important to be able to hear from all the panelists, and I heard a lot of recurring themes about just obviously the challenges that we face. There are opportunities, but just how important it is to invest in our communities and our infrastructures and the organizations that we're relying on to be there for them. What Ray and Christian have both said, and the Reverend before, about the need for funding and supports, more than ever, because if we can't people have, again, I think, a renewed appreciation for the importance of this work, but we need to follow that up with the infrastructure supports, not just for the organizations, but for obviously the broader needs.
Okay, I certainly would agree with that. I would like to just add that I think New Jersey is very important, really for the whole country in terms of involving this sector, shall we say, in meeting the needs of the state. And it is going to take a lot of work that I think Hispanics need to work together and work with other organizations to really achieve what we would like to achieve, to make sure that our immigrants are being integrated in a fair and consistent way. So I really want to thank all of you, for your contributions. The Reverend had to leave a few minutes earlier, but he, I think, was also useful to remind us of how our faith-based communities are at play here and are part of this picture.
On
So
behalf of our organization, I really want to thank all of you for this discussion. This obviously has been very insightful and the beginning of what needs to continue. As we all know, the immigration integration is a two-way street, and you, as leaders of our community and as nonprofit organizers, have done a tremendous job. I like to take this opportunity to make a call to all the audience to also join forces, because as we heard, the resources, the funding are very scarce, and we do need a lot more work to be done, and we need a lot more support. We heard about issues, how important the immigrant community is for the economy, not only of New Jersey, but of the entire nation. We all know that New Jersey is one of the most diverse state in the nation. But Ray mentioned about how important it is that we realize that also New Jersey is one of the most expensive states to live in. So what's going to happen? What is going to be the long-term effect of COVID in our communities? Are they going to be able to continue affording living in the state, or are they going to be forced to go somewhere else where it's cheaper? So, this conversation is very important. We talked about the study hall, obviously extremely important pre-K for our children so that our families can go to work. Christian also mentioned, and I'm very sorry about your personal experience with your friend, but we also have lived it as we service the community, how painful it really has been for all of us, but how unfortunate and this disproportionate impact that the pandemic, and not only the pandemic, but any other natural disaster, like Greg mentioned, the Sandy, it has on our community. So we have to be proactive. We have to be ready, because disasters are going to continue to occur, and we have to work together. There are so many issues, infrastructure, but we really thank Linda for being at the forefront, for being the only umbrella organization for nonprofits, for the advocacy, resources, and training. Obviously, for Ray, your work at Casa Don Pedro. Casa Don Pedro has really been an example for all of the other nonprofit organizations that exist here in New Jersey. Christian, you do a great job with land, obviously in the union as well. So Danielle, we're so proud of having you in the YACO board for so many years. You also inspire all of us. And again, thank you for your time, for your commitment. And we will be having these conferences on an annual basis, God willing. And we will continue the conversation at different tables. Thank you so much.
Agradecemos mucho su
We
participación.
appreciate your participation. Please do not forget to fill in the surveys. Remember that your response is absolutely private, confidential, and we will not compile any personal information. Your suggestions and comments will help us improve for future editions of our event. Thank you very much.